All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to the Device Talks weekly podcast. This week we're going to talk about magnetic robotic surgery systems. I spoke with David Fischel and Dr. Dan Cooper. David is the CEO of Stereotaxis, and Dan Cooper is an associate professor at Washington University's School of Medicine, who uses the Stereotaxis system. And Stereotaxis is an interesting company. It's one that I was aware of back in the late 90s when Intuitive sort of rose to fame and took over the robotic surgery center at the time. Stereotaxis, at least to me, maybe I was unaware of the distinction, but it was a different approach to having technology-assisted surgery. They use they use magnets that are controlled by robots to control the distal tip of a device, and you're able to guide it through the blood vessels with the magnetic forces. So I'm going to open up with the Stereotaxis interview. It went longer than most of mine. It was about 45 minutes, but I thought it was a great description as to how magnets can be used to treat people and to perform procedures. Again, I spoke with Dave Fischel and Daniel Cooper. Dave is the CEO of Stereotaxis. I'm going to run the first half of that interview at the start, and then we'll bring in my podcast partner, Chris Newmarker, and we'll also be joined by Daniel Kirsch, the senior editor at Mass Device. We'll go through the Newmarkers Newsmakers, at least the first half. We'll get an update on the Theranos trial, bring you back to the Stereotaxis interview. And then later on, I speak with Alberto Rodriguez. He's the founder and CEO of Levita Magnetics, which is another company that's using magnets. Its first product actually is used without any sort of robotic assistance, but its second generation is incorporating robots. And this is actually used in laparoscopic surgery, or used to assist in laparoscopic surgery. And it's an interesting model. Instead of bringing the robot in as sort of as something that can level the playing field for surgical talents, he's actually positioning it somewhat as a replacement for surgical assistance. So at a time when hospitals are struggling to fill out staffs, this might be a compelling thesis. So interesting topic. I'm sure you'll enjoy these conversations. But first, I'm going to open up with a conversation I had with Hassan Mokberi. He is the head of business development at FuTech. We're going to talk about FuTech's work in medical devices. Thanks for joining us, Hassan Mokberi. Tell us about FuTech.
Thanks, Tom. FuTech Advanced Sensor Technology, we are located in Southern California. We are known for miniaturization in the sensor market. Basically, the founder and the CEO of the company, he's a sensor designer himself, and been involved in the past 30 plus years in this market. And everything started from aerospace. So imagine he was one of the test engineers on the Discovery program when Rockwell International was awarded from NASA to build the space shuttle. And then after that program concluded, he started consultation in the sensor company. And so we got a reputation from aerospace. We have two sensors on board of Mars Curiosity rover since August 2012, and which is still operating up there. So that's why we talk about solutions from subsea to Mars. We have sensors on board of autonomous robots at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, tightening valves, up to the Red Planet that is operational even today. Perseverance is one. There's a most recent one launched, and Curiosity been working up there since 2012. And then from that point, all of those capabilities, along with miniaturization and trying to focus on the unmet need of the market. So we try to find the gaps in the market, position ourselves to solve those problems in the market. So instead of putting on energy to compete, we try to actually fill the gap with our technology and add edge to our business. And that's where we are today. The bulk of the business comes from aerospace and medical. And that's why we are in Device Talk having this conversation today.
We'll have more from Hassan a little later in the podcast. I have two other questions that I posed to him, so we'll spread them out throughout the episode. Now, let's hear from Dave Fischel of Stereotaxis and Dr. Daniel Cooper, Associate Professor at Washington University's School of Medicine. All right, well, David Fischel and Dr. Dan Cooper, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Dr. Cooper, I'll ask you a quick introductory question first, and I'll help the audience sort of get connected to your voice. What is your position? You're at Washington University, and you're practicing in St. Louis. What are you currently doing in practice, and what is your connection with, if any, with Stereotaxis?
I am an associate professor at Washington University in St. Louis. I've joined faculty back in 2003, so been at WashU for a while now. I've been the director of the EP Fellowship Training Program for the last 5 years, and Stereotaxis is something that's been, dear to us because of its origins in St. Louis. My mentors, Dr. Bruce Lindsay and Mitch Faddis, took a large role in some of the early studies, proving the efficacy of the technology. And so it's always had a presence at WashU. And over the last, decade, I've adopted it, particularly for specific complex ablation procedures that I feel there's really no better way to attack these particular cases than with that technology. And so due to that, experience, I've grown closer to David here and the staff at Stereotaxis as, they innovate and kind of move the technology forward.
And you're joining us on the podcast to sort of demonstrate or present the benefits of the procedure. David, let us get into the Stereotaxis story. It's a name. The company was founded in 1990. It's a name I'm sure many of our listeners have heard before, but may not have heard from in a long time. Tell us a bit about the company first, so everyone sort of understands what the technology is and how you combine magnetics and robotics into surgery, because it's a very different approach than most robotic surgery companies that we hear about.
Yep, sure. Happy to. I think we have a fascinating technology and that provides real value in a big field of medicine. And we also have a very long, interesting, complex history. So happy to go into any detail on both. And from a technology perspective, so we build robotic systems and instruments that allow physicians to perform endovascular interventions using robotics. Specifically, right now, one type of endovascular intervention, which is treating heart arrhythmias with interventional catheters, cardiac ablation procedures. If you think about using robotics in endovascular intervention, the primary challenge is that you have to navigate small flexible devices in very delicate anatomy. And the typical ways that robotic systems have been built are always with fixed rigid systems. And so what Stereotaxis did, in order to allow a different mechanism of action where you have direct control of the tip of a catheter, we use externally applied magnetic fields to create that direct distal control of a catheter tip, rather than, again, relying on the rigidity of a catheter to translate control from the handle to the tip. And so our robotic system are two magnets on mechanical motors that are computer controlled, that create very precise magnetic fields around the patient's chest. Those magnets are on both sides of the patient in the operating room, and a physician sits at a computer control station and is able to navigate an interventional catheter using the computer interface.
Actually, this would be a great time, David, if you would mind, Dr. Cooper, coming in. What is the interface like with the Stereotaxis system? How does the doctor control the distal tip?
Sure. So, if I could back up just briefly to kind of paint the picture of the alternative. So, on a day in, day out basis, the conventional ablation catheter is something that we direct from the groin, the patient's femoral vein or femoral artery is our point of entry. And so we are navigating through the vasculature, the blood vessels, up into the heart. And in order for what we are doing at the groin to be transmitted to the heart, that tool has to have a certain degree of stiffness so that it doesn't kink. and so that we can deliver the movement and move the tip of the catheter and deflect the tip of the catheter in a way that'll reach our target region. And all of those factors require the catheter to have a certain level of stiffness because of the pull wires and the braiding and everything that's required from an engineering standpoint to deliver that movement. And the challenge once you get in there is that you're dealing with heart tissue that is flexible and deformable and in constant movement. So the heart is beating and the patient is breathing, moving the thoracic anatomy up and down. And so it takes some skill to be able to balance that catheter in a way that is touching the tissue consistently without too much force, able to deliver energy to the tissue that will get rid of the rhythm problem without causing an adverse event like a tear in the heart. And so where the Stereotaxis catheter comes in is that it solves a lot of those difficulties because, the conventional catheter takes years of experience to become so good at maneuvering it that you can maintain efficacy with a low complication rate. The flexible catheter, the magnetic catheter that Stereotaxis makes, essentially removes a lot of those obstacles. It's the consistency of almost a spaghetti noodle. It's driven by the magnets, so it's pulled into the tissue rather than forced into the tissue with forward movement. And it's able to maintain this consistent contact because of the nature of the catheter. It's so soft that it actually moves with the heartbeat and it moves with the respiratory cycle up and down. So you maintain that steady contact, and that contact is at a force that is predictable, allowing you to kind of dial up your parameters in terms of the amount of power that you're delivering to the tissue so that you can, deliver the desired type of lesion to that, particular chamber. And so, it also lessens the learning curve, because like I said, it takes years to get good at in respect to efficacy and safety with a manual catheter. Whereas with the flexible catheter, there's a lot more wiggle room to move around with, less chance for adverse consequences. So that's what makes it a more enjoyable, relaxing type of approach.
I bet. No, and it's something you don't hear as a layperson, the training that goes on to performing these procedures. I'm curious, what is the interface like? What are you seeing when you are performing this procedure? Are you looking at a monitor and clicking an arrow with a mouse like I do on my laptop? Or is it more, I imagine it's more sophisticated than that.
Yeah, well, once the catheter is placed in the delivery tool, you essentially go behind, a wall in the control room, sit down in a comfortable chair in front of a computer screen, and utilize a mouse to advance and retract the catheter and move the magnets in any way that is required to reach, the target tissue. So yeah, you're sitting in front of a computer screen without, wearing lead. When you're at the patient bedside, because of the use of fluoroscopy, X-ray, you have to wear lead the entire time. Whereas when you move back behind the screen, the operator is no longer exposed to the radiation from the fluoroscopy. So you take the lead off, which obviously is a relief to the back over, these long procedures that can be anywhere from, an hour to 6 hours, depending on the arrhythmia substrate we're dealing with. Wow. So yeah, essentially sitting at a computer screen with all the data in front of you. And, I'll just throw one more thing in there. It's really the perfect teaching environment too. I work, obviously in an academic setting where I have a lot of learners. So I have, fellows and residents, interns, medical students that are with me at any given time. And because I'm not at the patient bedside and led in the more sterile environment, I'm able to sit there with all the data in front of me and also teach as we're moving through the procedure.
Interesting. It would seem to be an excellent synergy with the growing adoption of digital technologies in the OR and the hospitals. And I imagine younger physicians who are gamers and quite native on that platform might find this a more approachable way to perform the procedure.
For sure. I think the younger generation is much quicker to adapt to this technology. Even the chair that comes with the system looks like a gamer's chair.
That's great. Just last question about the procedure. Does this impact the length of time required for a procedure? Are you able to do it more quickly, or does it take longer?
It depends on the procedure. I think there is a learning curve up front where you learn the logistics of the system, and the staff have to learn the logistics of honing the magnets. And so at first, it probably adds a little bit of delay as you learn those logistics. But once those are learned, the procedure is of similar duration for most arrhythmias that we target. For some of the more challenging rhythm problems from the bottom chamber, I've actually found it much faster because you're able to traverse the difficult anatomy from one angle. I don't want to get into too far into the nuts and bolts of specific procedures, but there are usually a couple different ways to approach. One way is through a vein and a puncture across the upper chambers of the heart. Another way is to go in an artery and go backwards, and sometimes you have to do both. The Stereotaxis catheter, because it's so soft and because it's able to essentially do catheter gymnastics and make loops and go into tough to reach places, you can often just use one approach to get to every position you need to get to. So in that regard, I actually feel that it makes my procedures faster for some of those complex ones. But once you learn it, it certainly doesn't slow you down, and it can improve the efficiency in the complex ones.
Terrific. That's an excellent overview of what we're talking about, the technology and the procedure. Now, David, I'd love to understand sort of the business side of things. Explain how you came to learn about and understand Stereotaxis. I understand you came from the investment side, and you've really been involved as an investor to some degree with a lot of the robotics companies. So you seem to have a great overview of the surgical robotics universe.
Yeah, so I come from an investment firm called Daphne Capital Management based in Los Angeles. And for over 20 years now, we've invested in both drug and device companies that are pushing the boundaries of medicine, trying to address unmet medical needs. And I had experience investing in a passive investment role in companies like Intuitive Surgical in their early years, and in Mako Surgical, which was pioneering robotics in hip and knee arthroplasty. And when I came across Stereotaxis, I was intrigued by a dichotomy where, on the one hand, you had a very elegant technology. I believe that, as Dr. Cooper described, the mechanism of taking control of a catheter directly from the distal tip using magnetic fields is the most elegant way to improve endovascular interventions with robotics. And so Stereotaxis had developed this very sophisticated technology, and that technology actually was working in the real world in a fairly robust fashion. We have about 100 hospitals globally that have treated by now about 140,000 patients in total. So we're still a small company, but it's a relatively robust real-world validation that the technology was very practical and useful. And the clinical data was as good as it gets. And so in any investment decision, one of our core questions is, if, God forbid, someone in our family had this disorder, would we want them treated with this device or drug? And all of us felt very strongly that if, God forbid, we had an arrhythmia, we would want to be treated with Stereotaxis' robot technology because of the safety benefits, because of the precision and the stability. And so kind of that's almost kind of as good as it gets from a foundation to have a good technology that's differentiated, that adds that works in the real world and adds real clinical value. That's really kind of what you always dream for. But then the dichotomy was that, on the other hand, the company had been around for many years and had already by then a 5-7 year period of kind of stasis where there was declining adoption. The company had a very bad balance sheet and was kind of on the verge of potentially disappearing. And so that's kind of an interesting dichotomy to have, on the one hand, such fundamental kind of positives, and on the other hand, a fairly poor business situation. We decided kind of to take a much bigger role in trying to rebuild Stereotaxis and advance the technology and put it back in a position of financial health. And that has been kind of one of the greatest adventures one could ask for.
So you became involved with the company, I believe, in 2016. Is that right?
So we made in late 2016, we, along with two medical device CEOs, Joe Chiani, who's the CEO of a company in California called Masimo. They're the global leader in pulse oximetry, non-invasive monitoring of patients, and Dr. Arun Menawat, who was the CEO of a company called Novadac, which pioneered intraoperative perfusion imaging, and now CEO of a company called Profound, which is treating patients with prostate cancer. We and a few other investors invested in Stereotaxis. We paid off all of the company's debt. We gave it operating capital, and we took board seats. And then shortly thereafter, in early 2017, I took on also the operational role as CEO.
So explain to me what you're trying to... I want to find out, I think I said prior to the interview that I followed Stereotaxis earlier on. I remember in 98, 2000, and the Stereotaxis would go public in 2004. There was a time when it was sort of a bit of a, not exactly a horse race, but you had Intuitive and you had Stereotaxis, and they were both presenting very different approaches to robotic surgery. Intuitive clearly went the direction it went. Stereotaxis, as I mentioned, was a name we haven't heard about in a while. What went wrong during those years? And I guess what shortcomings are you trying to correct now that you're in charge?
Sure. So maybe kind of a few points there. The first is that Stereotaxis and Intuitive are both pioneers of robotics, but we do it with a very different focus in medicine. And so I wouldn't view us at all as competitors. We're really both trying to transform different fields of medicine. Intuitive has done an amazing job in transforming laparoscopic surgery. And Stereotaxis has really been and remains the pioneer in advancing robotics in endovascular intervention. And they're very, very different. Laparoscopic tools are not flexible devices that have to navigate the blood vessels. Similarly, our approach of using magnetic fields wouldn't really be relevant for laparoscopic surgery. So these are both two very, very big, broad classes of surgical intervention, and we've just kind of we're both pushing in our own fields to modernize those fields. Intuitive has obviously been the most successful medical device company of the last 20 years in how they've transformed laparoscopic surgery. If I think a little bit about kind of Stereotaxis' history and what led to its current position, you can almost think about the history in maybe kind of three kind of phases. The first would be kind of the initial phase where there was, kind of, let's say 2000 to 2010, just kind of for rough kind of years, where Stereotaxis was highly innovative. It was really pushing forward this kind of this new novel technology and approach to navigating catheters, and it started to commercialize, and in its early years it commercialized relatively well. In the 2005 to 2010 timeframe, it sold over 100 robotic systems. There was kind of quite a lot of adoption of its technology as it started to commercialize. The challenge at the time was that the system was launched somewhat prematurely when the technology was not yet ready for prime time, and because of that, many of the installations were did not actually actively utilize the robot. So they would buy a system, install it, and then it would sit idle.
And that concludes part one of my interview with Stereotaxis. We'll bring you part two after I speak with Chris Newmarker and Danielle Kirsch and bring you a word from our sponsor, FuTech. All right, Chris Newmarker, do you know what today is, Chris Newmarker, Thursday?
It's Thursday. I think it's some kind of national day, right?
It is an international day.
International
Podcast Day, my friend.
Podcast recorders of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains.
We are more powerful than ever. We will be giving away free content to the world. So I've got you a little international.
With a little bit of advertising, just a little bit of like friendly advertising. But yes.
We've slipped into our nonsense, but before we continue, I want to let everyone know that Danielle Kirsch is with us. Hey, Danielle.
Hey, Tom. Yeah, and Chris, thanks for having me again.
Woo!
Danielle's been watching the Theranos trial. She'll give us an update in a little bit. But Chris, I got you an International Podcast Day card. You want to hear it? It's right here in front of me.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's so sweet, Tom. That's nice.
It's been a special relationship, you and I, for the last year and a half. So here it goes. Ready? I'm going to read it. MedTech people are cool. There's no room for fakers, but I pity the fool who misses.
Newmarker's Newsmakers.
Excellent. Well done.
Oh, wow. I love it.
We are simpatico sync, my friend.
Got it. Mind meld. This is great. Love it.
So let's roll into number 5 on the big NN list.
All right. Number 5 on the list. We've got, this was just out of FDA. We're talking here on Thursday, just today, FDA announced that they had granted a 510K clearance for Siemens Healthineers. I have, this is a hard one to pronounce, a Neotum Alpha. But, the really neat thing about this is they're describing this as like the first major advance in CT technology in nearly a decade.
Wow.
This new, CT system out of Siemens Healthineers is counting each individual X-ray photon, and which is enabling more detailed 3D imagery. So I actually have some requests out to Siemens Healthineers for more information, and hoping to find out more, because this definitely the way FDA describes it sounds very exciting.
Yes, it's more detailed 3D imagery about what is going on inside a patient.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. All right, let us roll on to number 4.
Well, number 4, we've got like a SPAC attack.
SPAC attack.
Lumira DX. They're now trading on the NASDAQ under the symbol LMDX after their SPAC deal closed with CA Healthcare acquisitions. So they've got they're a point of care diagnostic testing company. They've got more than 30 assays across common health conditions. So I think, we're getting near a point where we just got to do a huge roundup of all these companies that have gone public through SPAC deals this year. It's such a huge trend.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just remember the time when it was just like a dearth of IPOs. It was like, oh, that's just companies don't go public. They just get acquired or whatever, and now we're getting like just, companies going public everywhere.
No, I agree. Definitely we should do a wrap-up of those and see how they're doing. I know we have one coming up later this month. And, of course, we had Vicarious Surgical earlier this year.
Yeah.
And speaking of Vicarious, they put together their own, speaking of International Podcast Day as well, their own podcast. I was happy to contribute to it. I tried to make myself sound smart. It's called More Capable. And for anyone who needs a pretty good overview of the robotic surgical space, the More Capable podcast, it's on Vicarious's website, vicarioussurgical.com, but it's also out there in podcast land. So it was fun to be on the other side of the podcast microphone.
Very cool.
Very cool indeed. It was good stuff and informative. They had folks from iRobot. They had obviously folks from Vicarious, but a lot of people who are looking at surgical robotics more as a surgical phenomenon than just the company by company look we have at. But we've got a very cool industry we're covering here, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just so many hot spaces right now. It's definitely not. It's exciting what this industry and space could do to improve people's lives, save lives.
Absolutely. Which is kind of interesting segue, because now we're going to bring in Danielle Kirsch to talk about the Theranos trial. We've been watching the trial of Elizabeth Holmes. And just a lot of discussions about that, and Danielle, you can update us on what's going on. But I think it's sort of the bright light that's been focused on what Theranos did and how they did it. I think just sort of is an indication of how seriously medtech people take their jobs as creating devices that can diagnose disease and help people. I think it definitely runs contrary to everyone's mission when products are being created that don't do what they say they can do. So interesting kind of contrast. But Danielle, how has the trial been going? What's new this week?
Well, in the last 3 days, one of Theranos' former lab directors has taken the stand all 3 days. And the first day he gave us kind of an inside look at Holmes's demeanor when he told her that the tests didn't work or he was uncomfortable with the Walgreens launch. And he said that she seemed nervous and upset is what he said during his testimony. So I thought that was really interesting on the first day. And then on his second day on the stand, he actually revealed that he was the source for the Wall Street Journal's uncoverings of the happenings at Theranos, and he was actually the basis for the Bad Blood book that John Kerry wrote.
Wow!
So, wow!
I was trying to remember the gentleman's name is Adam Rosendorf, and I saw that today about it revealed it as key source, and I couldn't remember whether he was highlighted in the book or not, or if so, how he was presented.
He was Alan Beam in the book. If anyone's read the book and remembers all the names in there.
Okay, so that was a pseudonym. That was a fake name.
Yes, he was under. Yep,
well,
he was in a pseudonym.
There you go. All right.
So we're getting some just interesting, like new pieces of information is coming out of this trial.
Yeah, for sure. Every day. It's like I said before. It just goes a different direction every day. And then on the most recent day of the trial, we're starting to see some of the pharma companies taking the stand to talk about how they weren't actually validating those tests, and how the one in particular that took the stand yesterday was Celgene, and they said that they ended a partnership with Theranos because the tests weren't matching up to like the gold standard method of how test results came through. So they were like, well, we're kind of going to end this partnership, but let us know if it ever comes back into range.
I mean, Theranos was just like promoting their blood testing technology so much. And, kind of seems like these pharma companies like thought this could be something like really useful for them as they conducted studies, but it just wasn't working out. Right.
The one in particular with Celgene was just so they could do a drug trial on a drug that tests or that treats anemia. So
that's interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, life sciences companies, medtech companies, pharma companies, they're about the data. They need to see the proof to make sure it works. It's great to make claims, but this isn't developing an app that's going to get dinner to your door faster. This is something that's going to determine whether or not people are sick and need treatment. So you got to have the data. And we're back again with Asan Mockberry, the head of business development at FewTech. Asan, you told us about FewTech at the beginning of the podcast. Now, tell us, who do you work with in the medical device industry?
So we covered that front in 3 different fronts. We work with capital equipment manufacturers. So almost the top 30 medical device companies out there, they either build their own device or they have subcontractors, they're building the capital equipment. So from surgical robots to infusion systems to angioplasty system to dialysis system, all of these equipment considered a capital equipment. We have safety features, in-process control, haptic feedback, type of force or torque measurement solutions inside that would be utilized for safety and for precision motion control. So that's one front. The other front is having sensors on board of surgical instruments that would be interacting and engaging with the capital equipment. And last part is high volume manufacturing of consumables. So all the consumables in the medtech market, they require unique customization. There are automation subcontractors in the market. They build the machines from scratch. Most recent cases are the vaccines for the COVID cases. And all of that requires a lot of automation. And we have solutions that would go inside this type of machines. And that's where we bring the sense of touch to the machine or the robot. But where we are known for is the surgical robot and most importantly, haptic feedback. So basically bringing the sense of touch to the fingertip of the surgeon behind the console. So what he's cutting, sealing, stapling inside the abdominal cavity, he can sense how much he is pressuring the tips and manipulating the end effector and having that sensational move at his fingertips so he can make a better decision. And at the same time, that information being collected and then analyzed later for designing better products and being collecting so many points of data from different ages, genders, ethnicities, being able to make better tools out there. So if I want to name customers, basically the top players of the medtech market, each one of them in a different way is our customer in the three different categories I mentioned.
We'll hear more from Hassan Amakbari of FuTech a little later in the podcast. And now we'll pick up our interview with David Fischel, CEO of Stereotaxis, and Dr. Daniel Cooper, Associate Professor at Washington University's School of Medicine. In this next segment, David explains why Stereotaxis' system initially didn't take hold. Let's listen.
The challenge at the time was that the system was launched somewhat prematurely when the technology was not yet ready for prime time. And because of that, many of the installations were did not actually actively utilize the robot. So they would buy a system, install it, and then it would sit idle. Kind of some of the challenges at the time, just there was a latency in the system. So every time, as Dr. Cooper described, he uses a mouse to navigate the catheter. Every time that you would move a vector on the screen with using the mouse, there would be a few second delay until the catheter would actually move in the real world. And that type of latency can be very frustrating. It's I think about it as if kind of you take your notes using pen and paper, and I give you a laptop and I tell you that the laptop is great. You can now type your notes and you can edit it and you have spell check and you can save it and you can share it with others. And there's all of these benefits from now taking your notes on a laptop. But if every time you type or you move your mouse, there's a 3-second latency, that would probably drive you crazy, and you might just go back to pen and paper.
Sure.
And there were other challenges as well. This is a different way to navigate. As Dr. Cooper said, there's a learning curve. At the time, neither the company nor the physician community really understood best practices on how to navigate catheters with this new approach. And so there were just kind of several challenges that made actual adoption in terms of procedure adoption, physicians using the robot that has been installed, challenging. Unfortunately, as that happened, the company started to see a decline in the number of systems being sold. And like most young companies, the company was hiring and investing, expecting continued revenue growth. And so as kind of revenue started to decline, the company had to scramble to cut its team, to cut expenses. It didn't have a great balance sheet, so it had to do dilutive financings. That causes its stock to drop. And you can almost envision how each of these kind of serve as almost a negative feedback loop. You cut your team, you're going to have disruption in the organization. It's harder to sell systems. Your stock is dropping as you do dilutive financings. That makes hospitals a little bit more concerned to make a large investment in a robotic program, and that serves as kind of then a negative feedback loop. And so the company got stuck in this type of negative feedback loop for quite a long time. And during that period, unfortunately, there was relatively little continuous innovation of the technology. And so you had kind of this period of stasis where the company almost was in a type of zombie mode where it would raise money to survive. It tried to keep the lights on. There was progress in terms of physicians learning how to use the technology, generating more clinical data, showing how good the technology was. But for the most part, the technology stood static. And that kind of gets us now to this kind of most recent phase in the company's history, where we've really been looking to rebuild the company off of that strong foundation of a differentiated technology that works and that provides real good clinical value. And we've been really focused on kind of three primary efforts. The first one was cleaning up the company financially. And as I mentioned, we paid off all the debt. We gave the company operating capital. We run the company really as owners I took no salary for the first 4 years while being here in this role. And we really kind of treat the company as owners who want to build a highly successful company. We're not here to take a salary and sit on the sidelines. And we have now a company that has 44 million cash, no debt, Despite doubling our investment in R&D, we run the company near break even. And so I think we've been overall successful in bringing Stereotaxis back into financial health. The second big area of focus was ensuring that robotic practices, the hospitals and physicians that have adopted our technology, are able to have very successful robotic cardiac ablation programs. And so instead of focusing on selling systems, we really kind of oriented the commercial team towards having all the right infrastructure and processes and incentives to make sure that physicians like Dr. Cooper can have successful procedures, can attract patients, can publish impactful clinical literature, can train the next generation of physicians. And so that was really kind of on the commercial side, that was our strategy and remains kind of the most important aspect of our commercial strategy, to make sure that just selling a robot is not, while it sounds nice to sell a robot and you gain revenue from that, in reality, if that doesn't convert into being a successful practice, it's a liability rather than an asset. And so really kind of that's been our commercial focus. And I think we've done many things there. We implemented, actually, Dr. Cooper was the inspiration for it and helped initiate it, a fellows program, which trains by now about 40 fellows globally at any given time. We've implemented a broad range of infrastructure that allows robotic practices to be successful in this holistic way. Mm-hmm. And then the last focus was on innovation and on a robust innovation plan.
Well, let's talk about that. I do want to get into in the future and follow up on a few of those other points as well. But how have you changed innovation at the company? Have you reinforced or reinvested rather in R&D? Are you able to bring people back? Because I imagine those are probably one of the first to go when times get tough at a company. The engineers would move off to a sure position somewhere else.
Yeah, we're fortunate that we have a core group of engineers that really are able to do amazing feats. And so we have a strong R&D team. We've been able to also rebuild it and grow it over the last few years. But they're able to do kind of things that when I look at other companies that have tried to build robotic systems in other clinical fields, oftentimes have an order of magnitude larger size than our team and are not necessarily able to do it better than us. And so I think kind of that's really one of the gems within Stereotaxis is how well our engineering team is able to build robotic systems. And robots are complicated. You need this confluence of large mechanical hardware, micro instruments, electronics, control software, user interface software, and all of it has to work kind of perfectly together. And so building robots that can withstand the kind of challenge and demands of the real world is actually very, very tough.
And how are things changed on the business side? Are you charging for the system, or are you leasing this equipment? Have you changed at all the transactional aspect of putting systems into hospitals?
So our model is very similar to the typical model for a surgical robot. We'd sell the robot, and then we have a disposable that's used for every procedure. And so we have both kind of an aspect of an upfront capital revenue and then a recurring revenue on the installed base. Mm-hmm. We haven't changed that. When we think about what our innovation strategy has been, it has really been, you can think about it kind of in a few broad goals. One has been building the right ecosystem of interventional devices and diagnostic data to support electrophysiologists as they perform cardiac ablation procedures. And so despite how well our clinical data is, many of the tools that Dr. Cooper and others around the world use are by now about 15 years old. And so there's kind of significant room for innovation in the catheter itself. We implemented new softwares that allowed us to integrate preoperative images of the patient specifically, to integrate better with a broader range of intraoperative imaging technologies. And so really kind of trying to improve the ecosystem that our robot works within. On the robot side, we did a lot. We launched just last year our newest robot, which is the first real architectural change in the system since it was launched also about 15 years ago. And kind of the guiding goal with our robot innovation has been, how do you make robotics more accessible and affordable to hospitals? I think that the clinical data for our technology justifies that the system should be available kind of in every hospital, but there are still construction challenges, logistic challenges, cost challenges to doing that. And as what we did with Genesis was make it much smaller, much lighter, easier to install in a lab. And again, we continue to push forward on that kind of overarching goal of making robotics broadly accessible so that you could have it in any interventional lab. And then the last kind of area is to grow from our beachhead, which is electrophysiology, to really being able to apply the benefits of having this soft, gentle catheter with that can be moved with precision and stability, and being able to apply those benefits not just in electrophysiology to treat patients with arrhythmias, but also in other endovascular fields.
How far away do you think you are from moving into those other fields?
We're making tangible progress, and so we've talked about we're a publicly traded company. We've talked about sharing some of that progress and some more concrete details on that plan at the end of this year.
Okay, terrific. Circle back to you, Dr. Cooper. Explain to me how having the new system changes an electrophysiology practice, and how does it fit into the hospitals? And perhaps you could, because I wanted to talk to you earlier about the physicians who were not using the systems after they were purchased. I mean, when you first mentioned that you could perform this without wearing a heavy lead smock, that seems like a huge selling point. So the fact that the system hadn't been used really speaks to what David was speaking about the latency problems. So
Sure.
How have the new systems perhaps reinvigorated the use of these systems? What is life like using the Stereotaxis system?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first point to illustrate is that, electrophysiologists are a strange bunch. I think we become very set in our ways. We're doing things that are, relatively, high stress, with, a lot of potential complications that can happen, during our procedure. And so as we learn our craft, I think we gravitate to what we know and what we're used to. And as you gain years and years of experience on doing something the same way over and over again, you draw a lot of comfort from that. Even if the technology sometimes is a little outdated, it's what you know. And so you kind of stick with that. And so it's hard to get electrophysiologists off their favorite catheter or off their favorite, three-dimensional mapping system. And it often takes, kind of a dramatic, change in things to grab our attention and have us, kind of change our ways. And so I think the thing that kind of, got us back in heavily interested in the Stereotaxis system is a lot of the things that David illustrated, that it's sometimes just a sense, a sense that the company is back to being innovators and trying to make, our life better. Because I think we all know, any of us that use the system, even in the early days, know the advantages of the flexible catheter. That goes without saying. Safety is the thing that I focus on with every single one of my patients. I tell my patients, we're going in to do this procedure. Every second of this procedure, my focus will be on safety. And right behind that is getting you a nice, efficacious result, of course. But I will always sacrifice efficacy for safety. And I feel that the Stereotaxis system essentially lends itself incredibly well to that mindset, that safety is almost just inherent to everything that you do with that soft, flexible catheter. And so you can almost shift your focus to just the efficacy part, getting to the tough to reach places. So I think, that sense that the company is strong, that the support is incredibly strong, and the fact that new things are in the pipeline made us come back to using it more and more. Now, at an academic center, it's always a challenge, because if there was a stereotaxis system in every hospital in the country, I would feel great about doing essentially every one of my cases with the stereotaxis system, for all the reasons that we talked about. Mm-hmm. But our trainees, our fellows, they need to learn their craft. And most of the hospitals that they are looking at currently, may not have a system. And so those manual skills have to be learned during fellowship. And those of us that have, a number of years under our belt feel confident that they can use the manual catheter with a high level of efficacy and safety. And so we feel that is a reasonable trade-off to keep using both types of ablation. There are some ablations that I cannot reconcile not using the flexible catheter in. There's a particular approach, PVC ablation, that I cannot convince myself that I can do as well or even close as well with a manual catheter, for particularly the tough ones that are recurrent from outside referring centers. They've already had multiple ablations and they're being sent to us for their third or fourth ablation. I feel that we have a procedural advantage by using the magnetic navigation. So even in those circumstances, I never use manual because I don't have the clinical equipoise to say, I think I can be just as good with both. And so, for those particular situations, it's used 100%. Now, with my partners or, my colleagues in the EP community that don't use it at all, I think it's what we talked about. I think they're used to what they're used to. They know the stereotaxis story going back to the early days that David illustrated and you were asking about. And I think there remains some hesitancy to adopt it until they see overwhelming, evidence that it's dramatically better and affordable for the healthcare system that they're operating in. I feel like the tide has, kind of turned us towards greater utilization, and I see, more and more adoption. And the trainees that are being churned out in these magnetic environments are, essentially planting seeds all over the country because they leave our program specifically and they've seen the benefits of using it for some of these complex cases. And those are my, those fellows that I've trained that have gone on to centers without it, they miss it. And I think in a perfect world, they would all have them, and maybe that day will come. But that's kind of how I look at that.
And final word for you, David. A quick question. This would seem to lend itself to the possibilities of remote surgery someday. I wonder if that's something you're exploring at all. And the bigger question that I'll ask you to end with is, what are you looking for it to be the sort of the tipping point where this comeback story has been successful? What will be a sign to you that you got Stereotaxis, your team got Stereotaxis back to where it needed to be?
So maybe I'll answer that second question because it delves in a little bit with what Dr. Cooper was just speaking about. When I was listening to Dr. Cooper, I was kind of thinking that he's describing very, very honestly, very nicely why medicine generally evolves slowly. It is just, as a field, typically things transition in a relatively gradual fashion. And I think kind of all of his descriptions kind of made it very clear the different factors and kind of why that happens. And so we're in this project as a longer term project because we think that Stereotaxis can positively transform endovascular intervention in the same way that intuitive surgical transformed laparoscopic surgery. And so to some extent, it's hard to say when we feel great that we have accomplished our goal. Like in most goals, the goalposts change over time and you continue to evolve it as you go. But we want to make sure that we're kind of, every year you want to say, this year, am I closer to that reality where endovascular surgery will be performed with robotics, where you will have the benefits of both the mechanistic benefits and the digital surgery benefits apply to these interventions. And so I'm kind of, so far, we've been able to march down that path. We're seeing kind of rapid progress in every aspect of the technology. And we kind of, we have a lot that we're still working on. So I think we're kind of excited for what we'll be able to accomplish over the next few years in terms of both in electrophysiology and in starting to address other kind of other diseases with our technology. And so I'm kind of excited about that path ahead of us. And that gets me maybe to your first question, which was about remote surgery. And maybe kind of to set the stage, before jumping right onto that, to set the stage a little bit, robots have been used across surgeries, whether you look at our robot being used in cardiac ablation procedures, or you look at Intuitive Surgical's Da Vinci system across laparoscopic surgery, or Mako or Mazor. Robots have been used predominantly for their mechanistic benefits, precision, stability, in our case, having this kind of soft, gentle catheter, which improves the safety profile. But really for the mechanistic benefits of the robot. There's this whole other class of benefits that all of us in the field are really just scratching the surface of, which is the digitization of the operating room. And robots serve as kind of the necessary foundation on which to digitize kind of the operating room. And certain things have already been done. So let's say image integration, being able to overlay and present nicely to a physician preoperative data on the patient with intraoperative data, and by doing so help in decision making. That's something that Intuitive Surgical has done. We've done that's something that has been already started. Things like automation, we have certain automation routines that can be built into the program. So the same way you think about self-driving cars, or kind of there's certain routine types of activities that you can imagine being really designed by the physician, the physician kind of then guiding the robot to do it, but the robot being able to do those routine activities in a more consistent fashion. And so those are things that we've started to build into our system, but are continuing to improve and to refine. And telemedicine is one of these kind of other core columns within this digital surgery field. And so we have started to see some remote procedures being done just on kind of a demonstration, to demonstrate that the technology is viable. And so actually last summer, we had a physician in Italy and a physician in Portugal who collaborated together. Each one was supporting and partially participating in the procedure of the other. And so the physician in Italy was overseeing the procedure taking place in Portugal, and was helping navigate the catheter at certain points, and then vice versa. And so we've seen a few of these kind of long distance procedures take place. When you do a robotic procedure, all of the procedural information can be aggregated on one large screen display for the physician. And so it's not a major leap to go from there to enabling remote viewing of that screen and remote control of that screen. And we've been, and so we've really been kind of working to refine that, and we've also been advancing some of that technology so that in the future that can be done in a more consistent, more accessible way, and hopefully in the future also we can pursue in the U.S. a more formal label for remote surgery. I think that what will ultimately kind of guide that to being actually something that can be used in day-to-day practice is less the technological hurdles and more the societal, legal, regulatory hurdles that need to become addressed and need to be kind of accepted by society.
Fantastic. Well, it's an exciting story. It's great to see Stereotaxis on the way back. And we've spent a lot of time today. I'm really grateful for both of you for taking so much time and for sharing the story on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right, we're back. Chris Newmarker, hit us with number 3 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers.
All right, number 3 on the list, there was news from the Irish government that Boston Scientific is going to spend the equivalent of about $34 million on its Cork facility. And they're going to be creating 70 new engineering and production jobs there over the next 3 years. But the Irish government in their announcement was saying this was about accelerating the development and manufacturing of minimally invasive medical technologies, treating people with cancer and peripheral artery diseases around the world. So yeah, a nice, good investment, in Ireland from Boston Scientific.
Well, if we cannot get Device Talks Costa Rica off the ground, then I would be all for Device Talks Ireland event. That would be great. I've been to Dublin twice for medical device events, but never have been able to tour sort of the Galway area where all the medtech companies are. It'd be cool to check all that out.
Yeah, but don't forget to check out some Gaelic football.
Yes.
While drinking a pint of Guinness.
That's on my list. Yeah.
It'd be a good deal.
That's definitely on my list.
I just, this isn't in the Newmarker's Newsmakers, but I also just mentioned today we had a big announcement of a big investment in Cambridge in Massachusetts that, Moderna is going to be building like a nearly 500,000 square foot science center. So I mean, some really cool stuff going on in Boston right now.
Yeah, there is a lot of life sciences movement, a lot of new facilities being built, and Moderna certainly is a major presence here. And I read in the Globe this morning there was actually a protest in front of the CEO of Moderna's house.
Oh, goodness.
That involved a lot of people from the life sciences industry, insisting that Moderna relax its IP protection of its vaccine and allow more people to make it. Wow. So I was surprised that a lot of folks within industry were pushing for that, and in the healthcare industry as well. So we'll see how that goes. But yes, Moderna is going to be a welcome addition to an increasingly larger life sciences footprint here in Boston. All right. What is number 2 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers, Chris?
All right. Number 2 on the list, we've got Abbott winning FDA approval for their next generation Amplatzer Talisman PFO occlusion system. It's interesting. Abbott was noting in their news release that a quarter of adults have a flap-like opening inside their heart that didn't close after they were babies. And this increases your stroke risk.
Interesting. Yeah, that's funny. I've heard of that before. I remember some startups about 10 or 15 years ago were going after that.
Yeah, well, Abbott, they've had their Amplatzer PFO occluder out for a few years, originally approved in 2016, and this is now like the next generation version of it, and it's kind of the big things was they had an additional 30 millimeter device size to it, and they're cutting the preparation time for the doctors because they the occluders come pre-attached to the delivery cable.
And this is the second FDA approval that you're reporting on from Abbott in 2 weeks, right? Last week we had the approval of their TAVR system.
Yeah, last week we had approval of their TAVR system. So yeah, Abbott's been racking up some FDA approvals.
That's right. A lot of champagne corks popping over there at Abbott. So cool. All right, let's roll into number 1 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers, Chris.
Hey, number 1 on the list. This ran in full on our on Mass Devices sister site, Medical Design Outsourcing, and this was from our MDO editor Jim Hammer, and he was actually interviewing Medtronic CFO Karen Parkhill for a larger profile. I'd say watch out for. I think it's gonna be a really good story. I mean, she's really a neat executive over at Medtronic. But while he was doing the interview, she mentioned some updates about how things are going with all the kind of like such supply chain hiccups that we've been seeing across the industry. I mean, it wasn't like it was pretty much similar to a lot of the same things like CEO Jeff Martha has been saying to analysts, but I mean there were a few different insights. It was a good story, just like kind of pointing out where things are for Medtronic and all of this. He got a good little quick news story out of this, and just her saying that Medtronic is holding up okay, but they're seeing like these supply chain pressures just like everybody else. That semiconductors are an issue, resins are an issue, and that at least for now, they haven't yet had to play the card with the government that medtech needs to be in line, first because of life-saving technologies. Though, when I was on a news conference last week with AdvaMed CEO Scott Whitaker, he said that they are pushing the Biden administration to prioritize the industry. I mean, kind of what he was saying was that they were, starting to see some signs that the industry could be affected by supply constraints. So they're, getting in there before it becomes a problem, and, trying to let the administration know, like, hey, you need to make sure that, medical, whatever you do to try to solve these supply chain problems, try to make sure that, medtech is first in line, near the front of the line, to get these needed semiconductors.
I don't think you can wait until it becomes a problem. That's for sure. You can't wait until supplies aren't hitting the hospital. So glad AdvaMed is on top of that.
And it sounds like Medtronic is too.
All right, now a final question for you, Hassan Mockberry of FuTech. Robotic space certainly is exciting. Where do you see this area headed, especially with companies like FuTech providing advanced miniaturized sensors?
What we are seeing in the market at the beginning, the whole focus was on the abdominal portion, the torso. But now companies, more startups coming in, getting into their different niches, and they're trying to focus on their specific procedures. So each one of these companies trying to build their own capabilities and trying to have their unique share of the market. So each one of them has their own patents or their way of taking measurements and doing the motion. So our type of solutions, either in that precision motion control, our solution is to work with these companies to retrofit a piece of their robot, or most of the time that comes down to size and making sure the solution we provide to them not only meets the size requirement, performance requirement, but also meets the power consumption, and also is hand to hand with the sensor is the electronics. That electronics having redundancy and having basically fault detection, bringing more reliability to this market, because most importantly, at the end of the day, is that reliability of the solution, because the ultimate goal in this market is these robots becoming more and more autonomous and making their own decisions, being more automated, making better decisions. And that comes with more sensors, more data points, and that's what we are supporting this market.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Hassan Mockberry, and thank you, FuTech, for sponsoring this episode of the Device Talks Weekly podcast. For more information about FuTech, go to futech.com. That's spelled FUTEK.com. Now let's run our interview with Dr. Alberto Rodriguez, the CEO and founder of Levita Magnetics. Well, Alberto Rodriguez, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to talk with you.
You are a surgeon, you're a physician. I'd love to understand how you came to decide you wanted to start a medtech company. What's the origin story of Levita?
Yeah, I mean, in Levita, we're a very, different company, and also the story is quite unique. As you mentioned, I'm a surgeon. I train in Chile, my native country. And I would say that I reached the medtech space by not even planning it. It was just mostly an accident, with the desire of how we can do things better, how we can always thinking how we can have a better outcomes for patients. So these are quite unique. I have been very fortunate to have a big experience before reaching the company. I mean, I live all the transition as a medical student, surgeon resident, and practicing surgeon. I live the story of evolution of surgery. And also I practiced almost 10 years in the busiest public hospital in Santiago de Chile. I was chief of the ambulatory surgical unit. So I saw the problems firsthand, and that's how the company kind of like the desire of doing something better, and then this translate to the company. That's how it started.
Well, that's great, and it's a common path for a surgeon to sort of find a new technology. What astounds me is the idea of incorporating magnets into laparoscopic surgery. I mean, that doesn't usually come to mind. How did that idea develop, and how did you decide it was a business you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, it's an interesting story because what we saw is the main problem that we have in the ambulatory unit that I was driving was pain in patients. We usually couldn't send patients home the same day because they have pain after the surgery. And the main reason why you have pain after surgery is the incisions that you kind of like do in the abdominal wall. That's the main root of pain, especially the incisions that you do it in the upper side of the abdominal wall for the nerves that we have. So with my dad, he's a mechanical engineer. We start brainstorming how we can perform the surgery with less incisions, but giving the capability of the surgeon to do the movements that you need for the surgery and avoiding so many incisions. And that's the way that we had when I was a child in my house. We have this turtle tank. I don't know if you know the kind of water turtle. So we have some magnets.
Sure, yeah.
We have some magnets that helps you to clean the glass without changing the water. So we took that concept of doing movements kind of inside of a space from outside. We're using magnets. So that's why we figured it out that using magnets was a very elegant and has a lot of potential for doing that. So creating movements inside of in this case, the abdominal cavity from outside without damaging the wall.
So we'll talk with Stereotaxis on this podcast and their use of magnets to move the distal tip. Your magnetic energy is used differently, correct? Are you trying to move organs within the body to create the space necessary to perform the procedures?
Yeah, our first product, the one that we have FDA clearance, is for creating retraction. It helps you to create the surgical space for doing surgery. So that's our first approach is demonstrating that you can use magnets in abdominal surgery for creating traction. It's a retraction. It's like how you use a grasper today. So that's our first stage that we demonstrate that you can use it. Now we are combining with robotics, and also we have more ideas. What I can tell you, Tom, is the magnets are the future of surgery, and combination of magnets and robots is totally the future. So we are totally aligned with the other company.
Well, let's talk about your first generation product then. So when was Levita founded? What year?
Well, I decided to stop my clinical practice, sell my car, sell my apartment, and move to the US in 2013. We have a first prototype that we construct with my dad in Chile, and we did some preclinical studies over there, and we saw the potential. So I decided to go full into the company in 2013. We were the first in the world developing this, so we went through the de novo pathway with the FDA. Also, we have our model is conducting all our clinical trials in Chile. Where I came from, actually, we perform a lot of our clinical trials in the hospital that I previously worked. And we were able to working with FDA to demonstrate that this technology was safe, was effective. And through the de novo pathway, we get our first clearance at the late 2016.
And what was that first product? What did it do?
It's our magnetic surgical system. It's the manual system that actually we use magnets to reduce incisions. Our first customer was Duke University. So I moved from the Bay Area to North Carolina. And I spent almost 1.5 years being the first sales rep of the company because mostly because I wanna be close to the use of the technology. And you can use this in a lot of procedures, but we need to understand what was the best way of introducing the technology to the market. And in this process is when we start figuring out that the combination of magnetics and robotics was very powerful. It was just one step that could be taken for more steps to keep growing. So it has been kind of like an interesting progression that has been very close to the actual use of the first product.
So what function did the first product perform, and what did it replace?
It enables to reduce the number of incisions because you reduce graspers that you need for performing the procedure. You can reduce between 1 up to 3 incisions depending on how you use the technology. We have figured out that one of the the easiest way of using it is in bariatric procedures, in sleeve gastrectomies, that actually we have managed to move from 5 incisions to 3 incisions, what we call magnetic sleeve. It's the kind of easiest use of our technology. And the beauty about this is that we avoid the incisions that are in the upper side of the abdomen, that actually are the ones who produce more pain and also more complications. So you get rid of the incisions that are more damaging for the patient.
So through your procedure, you were using one opening to insert something that was magnetic and would be attached to the tissue needed retracted, and then the magnet on the other outside of the body would be used to sort of move the tissue inside the body. Is that correct?
That's correct. And
okay.
Also, you're not limited by the entry point as conventional instrument, because when you have a conventional grasper, you use a dedicated port that also is your pivot point that limits your range of motion.
Okay.
The beauty about magnets is you can really move from one side to the other, for the upper side of the cavity to the lower. I mean, it's a very flexible technology that is different from anything else.
And what is the how was that first product received from laparoscopic surgeons? Were they open to the idea, or is it that dramatically different than what they were previously doing?
I mean, this fits very good with surgeons who want to provide a less invasive procedures. I mean, who really see value in reducing the number of cuts that you have to do to patients. So we have great receptions in terms of surgeons who share that concept of how we can do the surgery in a less invasive way. So far, I mean, we are we have a lot of signs that the adoption is going well. So far, we have done more than 3,500 surgeries here in the US. We have data, very well done studies that prove that the reduction of incisions is linked to less pain and a faster recovery, and also a less use of opioids. So it has been very, very, very like rewarding to see that surgeons see the value in our technology.
Now, that would have seemed to be an attractive product that a larger device company might have tried to acquire and to have sort of that proprietary technology. Curious, did you have in mind perhaps that you develop that product and then stop and sell, or did you always have this sort of tiered approach where you develop product number 1 and then move into, I think, what is product number 2, your robotic system?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, we first started the company as a product company. We always think that this product will be in the portfolio of a bigger strategic. But nevertheless, I mean, in this period of launching the product is that we saw the potential, the combination of robotics and magnets. We saw that there was a very synergistic combination. So that's why we decided to make a big jump and develop our own robotic platform. And now our path is to be a standalone company. We see that the solution that we are bringing is broad, is very solid. We bring what we call the triple impact because it's better for the patients, for the magnetic part. I mean, we reduce incisions, so it's very clear for the patient that it's better. We reduce pain, we reduce length of stay. It's a very solid value proposition for the patient. For the surgeon also, it's better for the less complex procedures like gallbladders, sleeve gastrectomy. That is the majority of the market. It's a better platform for doing the procedure because the camera is a robotic camera, is stable, plus the magnet give you better visualization. And also we bring value to the hospital because we reduce the use of personnel. I mean, our approach, as is different from anybody else, reduce the use of personnel for the surgery. And so we see that we bring value in these three point that is different from everybody else. So that's why we see that we have a value proposition, a product that make us think and go to be a standalone company. That's our current path.
So let's talk about the robotic system. Does that increase the functionality of your first product? And if so, what are you able to do with robotics, or what will, once you have FDA approval for the robotic system, what will it be able to do in the operating room that your first product can't do?
Yeah, that's the core question, and what we make this transition is because you can use the magnet, you reduce the incision, is better for the patient, but you need someone to be moving the external magnet in order to take real advantage of the technology. It's the same thing that with the camera. You depend as a surgeon for your assistant to help you to do the procedure. Mm-hmm. So you really need a very highly trained assistant in order to have a good assistant for the surgery. I mean, in many cases, you have another surgeon helping you to perform the procedure. That, as you can see, is not the most efficient way of doing surgeries. So, and also in the flip side, when you have a bad assistant, it's horrible. I mean, I have done surgeries with medical students that they don't know where the liver is located, and it's a horrible experience, because it's the same feeling that when you are teaching someone to drive, that for the first time that you get the car, you're responsible for the car, but the other people is moving the wheel. And so it's the same uncomfortable situation. And also, of course, that increase complication, increase the time of the surgery. So it's not the ideal way of doing surgery. With our platform, you give that control to return that control to the surgeon, because you control the camera, you control the external magnet that provide the surgical space. So it's a better way of doing surgery for the surgeon. And I can tell you that from firsthand, because we designed it with that in mind, how we can provide a better tool for the surgeon to do the surgery.
So the robotic arms of your new system, they do this? They do the same retraction of tissue that the first system was doing, just with automatically or with greater precision?
Mostly with full control. I mean, we first developed a robotic arm just for the magnet, and we conducted a clinical trial that we demonstrate that it was better to have a robotic control of the magnet in terms of giving control to the surgeon. Mm-hmm. And then you have the assistant just holding the camera. Yeah. So that's when we thought, okay, let's move another step forward, and let's replace the assistant with the camera plus our robotic control of the magnet. And that's our current solution. That is a beautiful platform, very cost effective, because it's a smaller robot. It's different of the approach that everybody else has of having a big console and a big robot, an expensive robot. This is a different approach to the market that we're very confident that will have a very good reception.
So I've been focusing on the retraction of tissue function. Is your robot guiding the laparoscopic tools that are used in the procedure, or is that still done strictly by the surgeon in the typical, more traditional way?
Yeah. So far, I mean, with the current robot, we keep the surgeon using the two hands, like a fork and knife, if you want to do it the more critical step of the surgery. We're still keeping the surgeon next to the patient. So that's what I mentioned. It's a different approach than anybody else. We don't replace the surgeon completely. We just replace the less complex, movements of the procedure, but actually are very important. And we keep the surgeon next to the patient in the stereo field. That also is different from others. So keeping doing the more delicate, I would say, parts of the procedure by hand.
So is it fair, and you can shoot this down, to identify your robotic system as almost a robotic assistant for these procedures?
Yeah, I'm happy with that, because I like solutions that are simple and work. Mm-hmm. I don't believe in technology just for the sake of it. I think that our core focus is bringing an impact, and our technology is simple but straightforward and bring clinical value. And this also is another stepping stone in our development. So it's fair at this stage.
Interesting, because it's an interesting distinction, because you have many robotic companies who are suggesting their platforms will elevate the performance of a surgeon who can benefit from someone else's expertise, and the hope being that if you elevate the performance of surgeons, then it'll allow, or it'll help accommodate or help overcome the shortfall of surgeons that we're facing. Yours is actually the first system that I've heard about that is positioned to say, look, there will be fewer people available. We'll have this system available to the surgeon to help with that labor shortfall that's coming. Is that a thesis of yours?
Yeah, I mean, what we want to do, we're focusing in making the good surgeons more efficient.
Yeah.
We're very, output driven. We use technology seeking an output. So, I mean, I see that in the future there will be different platforms for different indications. I think that others are working in the more complex procedures that I think is very, very important. We are focusing in the more simple procedures, but actually is the majority of the cases that happen in the day-to-day. That's why we're focusing on how we can make the surgeon more efficient, how we can make a surgeon make more cases per day, how we can reduce the labor related to that, because in that way you will be able to increase efficiency in surgery. And also with that, coupled with that, with a clear patient benefit, that's our number one. So that's why I'm saying that we have a different approach. It's a disruptive approach that nobody's following besides us.
Can this be used in conjunction with a robotic system that is performing the laparoscopic procedure?
Clearly, I mean, we develop our platform also in separated arms. So if you want to use our magnet in conjunction with the Da Vinci or the Hugo, we want to help patients. If you want to use our own platform for that, great. If you also want to leverage our just robotic arm with the other system, also we are happy, because at the end, that's our goal.
Are you just selling systems to the hospitals? How are these made available to hospitals? And is there sort of a disposable model that goes along with this? Are you just selling the system, or will you be selling tools to anyone who buys your system going forward?
Yeah, I mean, the component of the system is the robot, and also is the disposable inner piece, the disposable grasper that we already have it. I mean, that's the part of the manual system. So what we want to do is replace the external magnet with our robotic platform. So yeah, our business model is based on selling the disposables. And also, I mean, as this is a different approach to robotics, we are considering, and it's very likely that we want to start with a zero cost upfront cost for the hospital for the robot. We want to make it really different. We want to make it really easy to penetrate to the community. So that's how we are heading to make it a very affordable robotic system that even you don't have any barrier for starting to use it.
Interesting. And the question of how will robotic systems be paid for in the future? I know that's a model that others have raised, is the fact they wouldn't charge for their robotic system in the future. They'd give it to the hospital, but then they'd obviously provide the supplies going forward. So that's certainly an interesting approach. What sort of evidence, what sort of endpoints do you need to meet in your clinical trials to obtain FDA approval? I think I read that you were hoping to file for approval by the end of this year and perhaps be commercial next year?
Yeah, we're preparing our FDA submission. This is a part of our current system. I mean, we have the approval for the system. So our robot will be an accessory to our system. We have worked before with the same branch from the FDA. We're very careful to demonstrate the safety of our technology. So we have a very solid plan. This is a low risk robot in our opinion, because most of the movements are done outside of the patient. So we're very confident that we can get FDA clearance. We're planning to have it early next year, and we're preparing our initial entry to the US market with the experience that we already have with the first product.
And what level of approval do you need from the FDA?
We're thinking that it's a 510K clearance based on, as I mentioned, we want to use our system as a predicate. So, but of course, we have to work with FDA in order to get the proper clearances.
Interesting. And how have you been funded? I was looking online for some fundraising news. I didn't find anything. I didn't look for a very long time. I saw a $1 million round, and I find it hard to believe that was all that you've raised. But can you share a little bit about your financing?
Yeah, we are very, different than anybody else. I mean, as I mentioned, we're coming from Chile originally. So we have been very efficient in terms of use of resources and reaching this point with few resources compared to other companies. And most of our money is coming so far outside of the US. Nevertheless, we are having now US investors, and actually now we are talking with more traditional US venture firms, because we are seeing that the opportunity, as I mentioned, is moving from just being a product company to a robotic platform company. So we are talking with new base of investors, thinking about the next steps that we keep taking in order for taking this technology to a global scale.
And just final question, kind of an overview of where we're headed. What do you think an operating room, either for open surgery or for laparoscopic surgery, what does it look like 10 years from now? Are we going to have a couple of robotic systems in there and one surgeon controlling everything, like a one-man band sort of thing? What is it? How do things look?
Yeah, I mean, I think that of course surgery and robotics will be surgery will be with robots. I mean, that's a very clear stuff. I think that artificial intelligence also will play a big role. I think that you will have to keep the surgeon close and commanding all these new platforms. I think there will be different platform for different surgeries, because, for example, a prostate surgery is totally different than a gallbladder surgery, or a sleeve gastrectomy are totally different procedures. So I think that you will have different platforms for indications. And I'm predicting that surgery will be just one small incision. I mean, that I think that is what makes more sense. And of course, the surgeon playing coordinating all these technologies.
All right. Well, certainly some exciting times, and you've got some news coming up in the coming months. I look forward to keeping tabs of your story, and hope to have you back on the podcast. Thanks for joining us, Alberto.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, we have more developments in our files that I'm happy to be showing. In meanwhile, we keep growing the company.
We'll keep our eye out. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, now it's time to reach out and connect to our medtech community. Danielle Kirsch, where can folks find you on social media?
I am on Twitter at Danielle_Kirsch, KIRSH, and the same name on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Chris Newmarker.
Hey, you can find me on LinkedIn, Chris Newmarker, just like a new marker. I'm also on Twitter at Newmarker.
All right. I am on Twitter at MedTechTom. I'm on LinkedIn, Tom, SALEMI. Please connect to all of us. Please tag us when you share this podcast episode on your social media channels, and we'd very much appreciate if you would do that. And of course, when it comes to this podcast, Chris, what do they need to do?
Hey, you got to like, follow, subscribe.
That's right. Like, follow, and or subscribe on those podcast applications, so you don't miss a single episode of the Device Talks.
Be square.
Of the Device Talks weekly podcast, or our Medtronic Talks podcast, or we have another podcast that we'll be introducing very soon, I hope next week. So you'll want to like, follow, and subscribe for that.
Can
one
we tell
as well.
them what it is, or we got
not yet? I'm superstitious until I have it edited and ready to go out. I don't want to say anything publicly, but it's going to be good.
All right. We're teasing it out, though. There's something good coming.
It's going to be good. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. That's a wrap. Tune in next week.
Timer is set up over your podcast oven as you we wait for it to come out.
Are they ready yet? No, it's still a little gooey, but it'll be great. So tune in next week.
Don't burn the bottoms of the cookies, though. You got to keep an eye on it. Keep an eye on it, Tom.
I think Chris is hungry, so we better get going. Cool. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Tune in next time. We'll have another great episode of the Device Talks weekly podcast waiting for you.
Hey, fall's here. Enjoy the fall.
You never know what you're going to say. It's so exciting.